I was taking care of Ryan, tucking his blanket around him with mechanical precision. Are you comfortable like this, honey? Do you need anything else? I asked, my voice tinged with the weariness of routine. I watched as Ryan slowly settled himself on the couch, his movements a painful reminder of how multiple sclerosis had ravaged his once strong body. Now, he relied on crutches just to move a few feet. Ryan's smile was weak, his voice grateful but lacking the warmth it once held. No, Rebecca, everything's perfect. Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you, he said, quickly averting his gaze to the window. My heart ached at the sight, remembering the vibrant man I had married all those years ago. Once Ryan was settled, I headed to the kitchen to prepare the nutritious meal his remote doctor had recommended. I was both wife and nurse, my professional responsibilities bleeding into our home life. For 9 long years, I had dedicated myself to Ryan's care, watching him become more dependent with each passing day. As I chopped vegetables, the weight of those years pressed down on me like a heavy blanket. The scent of herbs mingled with the bittersweet aroma of resignation and determination that seemed to permeate our home. I could hear Ryan shifting on the couch, trying to find a less painful position for his weakened body. The disease had robbed him of even the simplest movements, trapping him within himself and leaving him reliant on my care for almost everything. As I adjusted the pillow under his head, I caught a fleeting thought crossing his face. Rebecca is really trying her best, he seemed to be thinking. But even in his mind, the gratitude rang hollow, more a recitation of expected sentiments than deeply felt emotion. I returned from the kitchen, balancing a plate filled with vibrant colors and the promise of health. Here you go, dear. Try to eat a little of everything, I said, placing the plate on the adjustable table beside Ryan. We need to keep your strength up, I added, my tone a mixture of professional care and personal concern. Ryan nodded, picking up his fork with a hint of reluctance. I watched him, my expression a blend of clinical assessment and personal worry. Do you ever think about when we used to dance? I asked suddenly, trying to inject a bit of lightness into our heavy routine. I asked Ryan if he remembered how he used to twirl me around the dance floor. He forced a smile, but I could see the pain behind it. Those memories felt like they belonged to a different era, almost another life entirely. Ryan said he remembered, but the glimmer in his eyes wasn't enough to hide his true emotions. He added that those were good times. Our exchange was a microcosm of our daily life, a blend of necessary care and nostalgic interactions, trying to fill the silences left by his illness. I sat down next to him, holding his hand, my heart caught between the present and the past, between all we had been through. I said we'd keep going, more to myself than to him. I was searching for the strength to move forward from the depths of my own resilience. I looked at Ryan, his face illuminated by the soft light from the window. The irony wasn't lost on me, how could someone I cared for so deeply feel so distant? I longed for reciprocity, for the emotional connection we once shared so vibrantly. Ryan automatically replied that yes, we'd keep going. The words flowed easily, but they lacked the weight of true emotion. Despite his often hollow responses, I continued to dedicate myself to Ryan's well-being every day. I nurtured a quiet hope that there was still something between us beyond this routine of care and superficial conversation. I knew the illness had changed so much between us, but deep down, a part of me refused to accept that everything had changed. The morning light was filtering softly through the curtains, spreading out. It cast a golden glow across the room where Ryan spent his days immobile. I woke up early as usual, preparing for another long day at the hospital. Before leaving, I approached Ryan and gently kissed his forehead. I told him I was off to work, that his meals were in the fridge, and to call without hesitation if he needed anything. Each word was etched with worry.
Rebecca left the house, and Ryan's expression changed dramatically. The face that had been full of feigned weakness now shone with cunning brightness and renewed vigor. Once he confirmed he was alone, he stood up from the couch with an agility that belied his supposed condition and walked to a small safe hidden behind a painting on the wall. He entered the combination with mechanical precision, revealing a substantial amount of money Rebecca had saved for medical emergencies or unexpected needs. "Ah, this should be enough for today," Ryan muttered with a malicious smile as he counted the bills. Pocketing the money, he felt excited about what the day had in store for him. Rebecca, with all her devotion and love, hadn't realized that while she was saving lives at the hospital, Ryan had been lying about his condition, fully able to walk all these years, and squandering the family's resources on personal pleasures. With the house now entirely his, Ryan left without a backward glance. He headed to a hidden corner of the city where, even in broad daylight, a secret disco pulsed with life. Lights danced, electronic music shook the walls, and the air was thick with the sweet scent of exotic drinks. Ryan entered the club with the confidence of a regular. He ordered the most expensive drink at the bar, savoring each sip as if it were sweet revenge against the restrictions he played out at home. "If you're living a lie, might as well enjoy the fruits it bears," he thought as he surveyed the crowd. For Ryan, these pleasures weren't mere escapism. They were a kind of reward for keeping up the charade. Hours passed as Ryan continued to party and spend money without a care. He laughed loudly, danced without restraint, each bill leaving his wallet a testament to the control he held over the situation at home. While Rebecca worked tirelessly, he reveled in the freedom bought by his lies, and would continue to do so until he had to lay back down on the couch as if nothing had happened.
I walked through the door after another long day at the hospital. I was exhausted but satisfied, feeling like I'd made a difference. "How was your day, honey? Were you all right?" I asked Ryan, not knowing that the darkness lurking beside me was far deeper than the night's shadows. Ryan adjusted himself on the couch, still maintaining his facade of weakness, and answered me in a feeble voice. But there was an irritation seeping through his words that he couldn't quite hide. He told me it had been a long day, full of pain, and that he hadn't been able to move from the couch. His eyes, though, they darted away, avoiding direct contact with mine. It was as if he feared I might see through his lies. Just then, a gentle knock at the door interrupted our conversation. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as I went to answer it. It was our elderly neighbor, Karen, holding a plate with a slice of homemade cake. She asked how Ryan was doing, her voice filled with genuine concern. I forced a smile, hiding my fatigue, and told her Ryan was the same as always. No big improvements, but we were hanging in there. As I accepted the cake with gratitude, I found myself wishing that my words of hope were more true. Ryan was listening to our conversation from the living room. When I returned, he abruptly, and somewhat rudely, asked who had come. His tone was worried, but not in the way a sick husband might be concerned about an interruption. It was closer to fear that a secret might be revealed. I told him it was Karen, bringing us some cake. I headed to the kitchen to put the cake on the table and start preparing dinner. Ryan didn't say anything more, just burrowed deeper into his blanket. I could almost hear his heart beating faster at the thought that Karen might have come at an inconvenient time. On another day, I finished making dinner and brought it to Ryan on the couch. Then I returned to the kitchen and sat at the table with a heavy sigh. The exhaustion wasn't just physical. It was deep, psychological, emotional. 9 years of constant caregiving, renewing hope day after day, and yet there was little to no progress in Ryan's condition. Doubts were beginning to sprout in my mind, nurtured by small signs I'd been ignoring. Suddenly, on an impulse, I stood up and reached for Ryan's prescription. My hands trembled as I held the bottle, a storm of emotions brewing inside me. I'd been a nurse for over 3 decades, seen countless patients come and go. But this was different. This was personal, and it was tearing me apart. I thought back to the early days of Ryan's diagnosis, how we'd faced it together with such determination. Now, it felt like I was facing it alone, dragging both of us along a path that seemed to have no end. The weight of our situation pressed down on me like a physical force. I closed my eyes, letting the memories of our happier times wash over me. Dancing at our wedding, planning our future, the laughter we used to share. Where had it all gone? With a deep breath, I opened my eyes and looked at the prescription bottle again. Something didn't add up, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to face the truth, whatever it might be. For both our sakes, I had to find out what was really going on. I stared at the prescription bottle, my mind racing. Why isn't he getting better? I whispered to myself, making a mental note to research each medication online later. I walked over to where we kept our emergency funds, thinking I might need to buy some extra supplies. But when I opened the safe, my heart sank. It was empty. Confusion washed over me like a tidal wave. This can't be right, I muttered, rummaging through the safe again, hoping I'd simply overlooked the money. But the harsh reality was undeniable, the money was gone. I don't remember taking any money out of here, I said to myself, my voice trembling. I called out to Ryan from the kitchen, asking if he'd seen our emergency funds. My voice was a mix of confusion and worry. Ryan's response came quickly, almost too quickly, and it was vague. He suggested that maybe I had used the money and forgotten about it, mentioning how stressed I'd been lately. I sat at the kitchen table, my head swimming with questions that refused to be silenced. The missing money was shocking, but what troubled me most was Ryan's health, showing no signs of improvement. I picked up the information leaflet for Ryan's medications and examined it more closely. Something felt off, and the nurse in me couldn't ignore the signs. I opened the browser on my phone and typed in the names of the medications listed on the leaflet. I expected to find a list of uses corresponding to multiple sclerosis treatment, but to my surprise, the search results were entirely different. There was no connection between these drugs and my husband's illness. My heart raced, and a seed of confusion and growing distrust sprouted within me. How is this possible? I whispered to myself, feeling the weight of this discovery. I knew I needed to confront Ryan about this confusion, but part of me feared the answers I might find. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, I got up with a new sense of purpose. I was preparing for another day at work, but before that, I needed to question Ryan about the discrepancies I'd found. With a strength in my voice that belied my anxiety, I approached Ryan, still in bed, pretending to prepare for another forced day of rest. Ryan, I looked at the information for the medication you're taking, and something's not right. These aren't used for treating multiple sclerosis. Can you explain this to me? I asked, carefully observing his reaction. Ryan seemed taken aback by my direct question so early in the morning, and there was a slight delay in his response. He stammered something about his telemedicine doctor prescribing the medications. He suggested that maybe my research was incorrect, saying the doctor had called and told him these were best for his case. His voice was calm, but his eyes didn't meet mine, looking anywhere but directly at me. Ryan's words were what I expected, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. I sighed, feeling a temporary sense of defeat. I wasn't satisfied, not by a long shot, but I had to go to work.
As Rebecca headed to work, Ryan reflected on his close call. He knew he needed to be more careful. Sitting at the kitchen table, he began to think about how to create better fake prescriptions for next time. He thought a forged doctor's signature might be more convincing. After searching for the names of well-known local physicians, he began drawing lines on a scrap of paper, attempting to mimic the signature of one of the experts he'd seen online. Later that day, while Rebecca was at work, Ryan decided to enjoy his freedom once more. He got dressed and went out, too engrossed in his own plans to notice the neighbor, Karen, who happened to be looking out her window just as he passed by. Karen, who knew of Ryan's supposedly debilitated state, was utterly confused to see him walking with ease. Her eyes widened, and her mouth fell open in shock. "What on earth is going on?" she muttered to herself, squinting as if the reality before her eyes might change. The image of Ryan, supposedly confined to the couch and dependent on Rebecca's care, stood in stark contrast to the man now moving freely about.
I was at the hospital, but my mind was elsewhere. As I moved from one task to another, I couldn't stop thinking about my morning conversation with Ryan about his medication. No matter how much I researched, those pills seemed to have nothing to do with treating Ryan's condition. I kept wondering, was this doctor making a huge mistake, or was my husband lying to me? My heart felt heavy with uncertainty and doubt, feeling betrayed by the implications of these discoveries. During my break, I ran into Dr. Daniel, a longtime colleague and trusted friend. Daniel, always a good listener, lent an ear as I shared my findings and concerns. He frowned with worry, telling me that if these medications weren't related to Ryan's illness, something was definitely wrong. He echoed my thoughts: either Ryan's doctor was making a big mistake, or someone was lying. The idea of Ryan lying seemed absurd to me at first. I told Daniel that there must be some mistake, that Ryan wouldn't do something like that. I suggested that maybe the doctor had the wrong information, and I'd look into it more. I was still hesitant to accept the possibility that my husband could be involved in such an elaborate deception. Hours of contemplation left me feeling like I was trapped in a maze of doubts and fears. Every turn I took led me back to the same unsettling questions. I thought about our life together, the years of caring for Ryan, the sacrifices I'd made. Had it all been based on a lie? The weight of this possibility was almost too much to bear. It felt like the ground beneath my feet was shifting, threatening to crumble at any moment. But as the day wore on, I felt a resolve growing within me. It was like a small flame, flickering at first, but slowly growing stronger. I couldn't just keep watching and wondering. I needed to confront this head-on. I can't just sit back and watch anymore, I told myself, feeling a determination I hadn't felt in a long time.
As Ryan returned in the afternoon, he picked up his crutches from outside the house and headed towards the door, trying to avoid suspicion. Karen stood on her porch with a challenging demeanor. Ryan, surprised to find Karen in such a state, tried to maintain his composure. He asked if there was anything he could help her with, his voice a mixture of caution and feigned innocence. Karen confronted him, saying she had seen him walking today as if nothing was wrong. She asked if Rebecca knew about this, her eyes fixed on him, searching for signs of guilt. Ryan's expression hardened, realizing his lie was under threat. He quickly responded that Karen must be confused, insisting he could barely move. As he realized Karen wasn't convinced, his voice dropped to a threatening tone. He told her that if she really saw something, it would be better to keep it to herself. He warned that it's not good to stick one's nose into things that don't concern them, and it might be dangerous. Karen retreated slightly, a bit frightened by the veiled threat, but her resolve wasn't completely shaken. She said she just wanted to understand, more to herself than to him, as Ryan passed by her and entered the house, leaving her alone with new doubts and fears. Ryan sensed the hesitation in Karen's eyes and knew he needed to reinforce his control before the situation spiraled out of hand. With calculated calmness, he moved a bit closer. his expression hardening with determination to protect his lie. He told Karen that she might think she saw something, but he assured her she was making a big mistake. He suggested it could have been a trick of the light, shadows, or her eyesight, implying that people her age often have such confusions. Karen, though shaken, still maintained a defiant gaze. Ryan continued, his voice now carrying a threatening weight. He asked who she thought Rebecca would believe if Karen said anything, her husband who was sick day and night, or a neighbor who suddenly started seeing things. He paused, letting his words sink in. Ryan told Karen to think carefully, warning that such accusations might make people question her sanity. He asked if she wouldn't find it sad if everyone started thinking she was crazy. Karen swallowed hard, the reality of Ryan's words cutting through her like a cold blade. She began to back away, her confidence shaken by the veiled threat of being isolated from the community she cherished. She murmured that she just wanted to do what was best for Rebecca, trying to justify her intervention. At that moment, Rebecca arrived.
I arrived home to find Ryan and Karen together, and I could feel the tension hanging in the air between them. "What's going on here?" I asked, looking back and forth between them, an unsettling feeling starting to form in the pit of my stomach. Ryan quickly fabricated an excuse, telling me they were just discussing some recipes. He claimed Karen was giving him advice on foods that might help his condition. He added that he'd been moving around a bit more to get used to the crutches, but realized he still hated them. As he spoke, he flashed a forced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I noticed him give Karen a meaningful look, as if reminding her of something. Karen, seeming to feel the weight of Ryan's gaze, hesitated for a moment before nodding weakly. She agreed with Ryan's story in a feeble voice, avoiding my eyes as she spoke. I was still uncertain, but decided not to push further at that moment. I tried to rationalize the strange atmosphere as Karen's concern for Ryan's health. As Ryan maintained his facade of politeness for a few minutes of small talk, Karen felt the need to escape the tension and said her goodbyes. As she walked towards her house, thoughts swirled in her mind like leaves in the wind. She wondered how she could tell me what was really happening without being doubted. How could she protect her friend when her own testimony might be questioned? She was painfully aware that revealing the truth might not be as simple as she had hoped, despite her good intentions. Karen entered her home feeling defeated, but not entirely beaten. She knew she needed a strategy. Perhaps concrete evidence or a way to make Ryan confess that he couldn't take back with excuses or lies. "I'll find a way," she promised herself, with renewed determination despite the adversity. The fight to help me had only just begun, and Karen was prepared to see it through to the end. Ryan lay back on the couch, feigning difficulty, but his usual expression of weakness had been replaced by one of thoughtful concern. The possibility of Karen telling me what she had seen troubled him. He knew that if his lies were exposed, he would not only lose my sympathy and support but also face social and possibly legal consequences. I need to keep Karen quiet, he thought, calculating his future moves with the precision of a chess player. In addition to his immediate concerns about Karen, Ryan reflected on the motivations behind his long-term plan. From the beginning, his goal had been to live comfortably without the responsibilities of work or the demands of daily life. Manipulating me into caring for him and providing money for the household had been an essential part of his scheme. As I entered the living room, Ryan's mind quickly shifted from plotting to playing his role. I approached him with a more serious expression than usual and asked a direct question. I asked to see the prescription for his new medication and inquired about the doctor treating him. A hint of suspicion tinged my voice. Without hesitation, Ryan took one of the recently forged prescriptions from the center table. He had deliberately left it there for me to find. The prescription bore a meticulously forged signature that he had practiced to perfection. Here it is, darling. This is from the new doctor recommended by our insurance. He seems very competent, Ryan said, handing the prescription to me. I examined the document with a thoughtful expression. I asked for the doctor's name and if I could visit with Ryan next time, hoping his answer would reveal her growing suspicions. Ryan felt a knot in his stomach, but kept his expression controlled. He replied that the doctor was very busy with many appointments and didn't prefer unnecessary visits. However, he offered to ask the doctor to speak with me next time if I wished, avoiding committing to a name or meeting that might expose his lies. I held the prescription Ryan had given me, my fingers tracing the doctor's signature. Something didn't feel right, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I decided to follow this lead when I was alone. Later, when Ryan was resting, I slipped into the kitchen, my heart pounding with anticipation and dread. I dialed the number Ryan had provided, each ring echoing my growing anxiety. Finally, a woman's voice answered, formally stating it was Dr. Mendez's office. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice as I explained that I wanted to speak with Dr. Mendez about my husband, Ryan Anderson, who was receiving prescriptions for a serious illness. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Then, the receptionist's confused reply hit me like a ton of bricks. She said they had no record of a patient by that name. My heart sank, the weight of realization settling in my chest like a cold, heavy stone. I thanked her and hung up, my hand shaking as I placed the phone back in its cradle. The room seemed to spin around me as the implications of what I just learned began to sink in. Ryan had been lying. But why? How far did this deception go? As Saturday morning dawned, bright and quiet, it stood in stark contrast to the tension simmering beneath the surface in me and Ryan's home. Karen, with cake in hand and a plan in mind, rang her neighbor's doorbell without hesitation. She had decided it was time to take action, even if it meant confronting Ryan directly. Ryan, who had adopted crutches as props for his disability act, opened the door looking visibly worried to see Karen there so early. He asked Karen, with feigned politeness barely masking his unease, to leave if she had come to say foolish things to his wife. Noticing Ryan's discomfort, Karen couldn't suppress an ironic smile. She said she had just brought the cake to bring some joy to their Saturday, thinking they could share it as good neighbors. Her voice was laced with sarcasm, but her eyes shone with clear intent. At that moment, I appeared. My face brightened at the sight of Karen. I exclaimed with genuine delight at the unexpected visit, inviting Karen in to join us for breakfast. Reluctantly, Ryan stepped aside to let Karen enter, following behind them on his crutches. We sat at the kitchen table as I poured coffee and sliced the cake Karen had brought. The sweet aroma of Karen's cake mingled with the fresh coffee, creating a cozy atmosphere that was at odds with the tension in the air. As we sat around the kitchen table, I noticed Karen weaving comments into the conversation that seemed to carry extra weight. She said something about how it's always good to see people for who they really are, and that sometimes the truth is sweeter than any cake she could make. As she spoke, her eyes darted meaningfully towards Ryan. I saw Ryan swallow hard, clearly uncomfortable. Something felt off, and I excused myself to go to the bathroom. Instead, I positioned myself where I could hear their conversation in the kitchen. That's when I heard Ryan whisper threateningly to Karen. He told her to watch what she said, to not stick her nose where it didn't belong. He implied something unfortunate might happen if her insinuations caused trouble. When I returned, I pretended I hadn't heard anything, keeping my expression neutral. A few minutes passed as we steered the conversation to other topics. Then Karen stood up to leave. I walked her to the door, gesturing for Ryan to wait inside. Outside, Karen finally broke down in tears. Concerned, I asked her what was going on. With shaky breaths, she revealed the whole truth. She told me Ryan wasn't sick, that she wasn't even sure if he had ever been sick. She said she had seen him walking normally when I wasn't around. "He's deceiving you, dear," she said, and those words hit me like a ton of bricks. I listened in shock and disbelief as Karen told me everything, from the threats to the suspicious behavior. Her words, devastating as they were, began to make sense. They connected the dots of doubt I had already been accumulating. Tears of sadness and betrayal started to roll down my face. I hugged Karen, grateful for her courage in revealing this painful truth. Back inside, I faced Ryan in the living room. The tension between us was palpable after Karen's shocking confession. I knew I needed time and space to process the information and decide on my next steps. I told Ryan I needed to go out to take care of something work-related. I struggled to keep my voice steady, despite the turbulent emotions I was feeling inside. Ryan, sensing that I might be suspecting something more serious, seemed to reach peak anxiety. He questioned if I really needed to go out right then, suggesting I could handle it from home. He added that I seemed to be going out a lot lately, and that he didn't trust me walking around alone at night. I was overwhelmed by the day's emotions and my growing suspicions. Ryan's voice was tinged with irritation and desperation. I responded with a determination I rarely showed. I told him that yes, I was going out. It couldn't wait. It was important. My resolve was clear, leaving no room for argument. As I drove, my mind was a whirlwind of confusion. I needed an outside perspective, someone I could trust completely. I reached for my phone and dialed Dr. Daniel's number. As soon as he answered, I asked if we could meet. I told him I needed to talk about something personal. A little while later, Dr. Daniel and I met at a small, quiet cafe far from prying eyes. There, I poured out everything, the discrepancies in the medical prescriptions, Karen's accusations, and Ryan's subtle threats. Dr. Daniel listened carefully, his expression growing increasingly serious. He told me that this was very serious. If Ryan was indeed faking this, it wasn't just a massive betrayal, but an abuse of my kindness and professionalism. His tone was filled with concern and indignation.
Meanwhile, at home, Ryan paced back and forth, tormented by uncertainty. He knew that if Rebecca started investigating more deeply, everything could fall apart. The thought of running away crossed his mind, escaping from the situation he had created. But something inside him resisted that idea. He muttered to himself that there must be a way to fix this. A plan began to form in his mind. He thought he needed to do something big to regain her trust. However, before making any hasty decisions, Ryan sat down, tried to calm his breathing, and organize his thoughts. He believed that if he handled this smartly, he could still turn the game in his favor. He frantically devised plans not just to maintain the current situation, but to strengthen his position in Rebecca's life. He knew he needed calculated and persuasive actions. Taking a deep breath, he decided not to run away. Instead, he chose to face the situation head-on. He believed in his ability to manipulate and regain Rebecca's trust, to keep his world of lies intact. Driven by the desperate need to restore Rebecca's faith in him, Ryan went to the closet in their shared room. He rummaged through drawers until he found a well-hidden container. It was a metal box where he kept the medications he was supposed to have been taking for years. The bottles were still sealed, the pills untouched. It was a collection of encapsulated lies he had skillfully hidden from Rebecca. With a heavy sigh, Ryan picked up the bottles, resolving to take a new approach to his elaborate deception. Later, as Ryan lay on the couch, pretending to continue his recovery routine, Rebecca finally returned from her talk with Dr. Daniel.
As I watched Ryan set aside his crutches and take his medication, my gaze was sharp and attentive. I didn't miss the moment when he unconsciously swallowed more pills than necessary. I scolded him, telling him not to overdose on the medication as it could be dangerous. My voice was laced with feigned concern. I observed his every gesture, inwardly wondering if Ryan truly understood the effects if he actually overdosed on those pills. Deep down, I questioned his every move. His actions seemed desperate rather than calculated. Ryan just nodded, attempting a faint smile to reassure me. He said he just wanted to get better faster, asking if I understood how hard it was to always rely on others. He was clearly trying to evoke sympathy. But I didn't fully buy into his act. I spent the rest of the evening in silence, carefully observing him while avoiding a more direct confrontation. Minutes passed, and I was already lying in bed with Ryan beside me, but sleep eluded me. Thoughts raced through my mind, especially Dr. Daniel's words from earlier that evening. He had said I needed concrete evidence, something that left no room for interpretation other than Ryan's lies. I knew that without something solid, even if I confronted Ryan, he might twist the situation in his favor again. Steeling my resolve, I began to formulate a plan. I decided that the next day, Monday, I would pretend to go to work but instead stay nearby to secretly observe how Ryan spent his days when he truly thought he was alone. I thought to myself, if he's lying about his condition, I'll discover it. Then I can confront him with the truth. My determination was strengthened by the need to uncover the truth behind the lies haunting my marriage. As the morning light began to spread across the neighborhood, I was preparing to leave. I dressed for work, took my bag, and went out the front door, carefully closing it behind me. But instead of heading to my car, I quickly veered to the side of the house, finding a hiding spot where I could observe the back door unseen. A few minutes passed, though to my anxious mind it felt like hours. Then the back door opened, and Ryan emerged. After carefully looking around, he began to walk with an agility that belied his supposed disability. Shocked and hurt by the certainty of his deception, I quickly took out my phone and began recording him as he walked away. Trembling, I followed Ryan at a safe distance, careful not to be seen. He walked to a local bar. I stood outside the bar, a simple, unassuming place. I watched as Ryan walked in with a familiar ease, no trace of the crutches he used at home. I seized the moment to take as many photos as I could. Each click of my phone captured more of the painful truth I was now facing. I can't believe it, I thought to myself, my husband has really been lying for 9 years. After making sure I had enough evidence, I couldn't bear the sight anymore and hurried away. Tears began to flow freely down my face as I walked aimlessly, lost in my thoughts and the betrayal I had just confirmed. Eventually, I realized I couldn't go home. Not yet, not with my heart feeling this heavy. Instead, I headed to Karen's house. When I knocked on the door, my neighbor greeted me and immediately noticed the distress on my face. Karen anxiously asked what had happened. I could barely speak, but through sobs, I showed her the photos on my phone. She hugged me and led me inside, telling me I wasn't alone. She sat me down on the sofa and comforted me, saying we'd get through this together. Hours passed, surrounded by tea and tissues, as Karen consoled me and helped me gather strength to face the situation. Meanwhile, Ryan, unaware of what had been discovered, returned home before nightfall. He thought his day of freedom had passed unnoticed. I left Karen's house a little later and returned home too. I took a deep breath, preparing for the inevitable confrontation I knew was coming. Each step towards the house strengthened my resolve to end the lies once and for all. As I entered the living room, I quietly observed Ryan. My heart was heavy with the weight of what I had discovered earlier that day and the images I had captured. I watched him open the pill bottle again, taking a dose far beyond what any doctor would recommend, with a recklessness bordering on carelessness. In Ryan's mind, each pill he swallowed was another brick in the wall of lies he believed he was reinforcing. He thought the more medication he took, the easier it would be to prove his illness was real. He was convinced that no one would doubt a man clearly dedicated to his recovery. But I knew the truth was different. Ryan's actions were only digging him deeper into the hole he'd created. With my phone in hand, I quietly texted Dr. Daniel from a corner of the living room. I whispered that I had gotten the evidence and was sending it all now. I attached photos and videos of Ryan walking normally and entering and leaving the bar. Dr. Daniel responded with the seriousness the situation demanded. He told me I'd done great work and that he'd send everything to the court immediately. He explained that this was no longer just a divorce case. Ryan had forged signatures, medical prescriptions, and documents, and had pretended to be disabled. This was serious fraud, he said, and Ryan could face severe legal consequences. Dr. Daniel's voice was firm, outlining a clear plan of action. Before I could respond, I realized Ryan, who had seemed absorbed in his own world, had heard everything I'd said. When he understood what was happening, his face contorted with anger. He suddenly stood up and started shouting at me, his words full of rage and desperation. He demanded to know how I could do this after everything he'd done for us. I felt fear rising in me as Ryan moved towards me and grabbed my arm tightly. Summoning all my courage, I pulled my arm away and ran towards the door, grabbing the house keys on my way. Outside, I found Karen already there, her expression worried. She told me she'd heard shouting and knew something was wrong. She'd already called the police. Karen's tone showed she was ready to help with whatever was needed. We slammed the door shut, and I locked it. My heart was pounding uncontrollably as we waited for the police to arrive. I could still hear Ryan shouting inside, but with Karen by my side and the police on their way, I finally felt like I was putting an end to the chain of lies and manipulation. I clutched the keys tightly. They were a symbol of my determination to close the door not just on Ryan, but on the painful past I was leaving behind. Inside the house, driven by anger and desperation, Ryan stared at the pill bottles scattered on the table. In a twisted attempt to somehow turn the situation around, he began swallowing pill after pill. He kept repeating to himself that he'd prove to everyone that he really needed these medications, that they'd see he had been telling the truth. His vision was starting to blur. I stood outside, listening to the muffled sounds coming from inside the house, not knowing what was really happening. Karen was beside me, trying to keep me calm. She assured me that the police would be here soon and everything would be all right. Her words were meant to comfort, but my heart was racing. When the police arrived, they used my keys to open the door. What we saw was chaos. Ryan was unconscious on the floor, surrounded by empty pill bottles. One of the officers checked his vital signs and immediately called for medical assistance. He shouted that they needed an ambulance right away, that it was an overdose. As his colleague started first aid, I felt my world spinning. Ryan was rushed to the hospital, where doctors worked quickly to stabilize him. As soon as he regained consciousness, after a series of emergency tests, they discovered that the massive drug intake had caused serious side effects. He had lost sensation in both legs for an indeterminate period. Dr. Daniel, who was already at the hospital and had heard everything from the doctors, remarked to me how ironic it was. Ryan had been pretending to be sick for so long, and now he was facing real, albeit temporary, paralysis. I watched as Dr. Daniel calmly explained the situation to a police officer who had just arrived with a thick envelope of documents and photos. He told them that here was all the evidence of Ryan faking his condition for years, from forged medical prescriptions to testimonies and photos of him walking normally. Hearing this, Ryan tried to protest. His voice was weak and trembling. He said he just wanted to make things easier, that he never meant to hurt anyone. but his words sounded hollow in the face of the gravity of his actions. The officer carefully handcuffed him, explaining that he was under preventive detention. The charges were serious, and he would have to answer for his actions in court. Ryan hung his head, no longer able to face the people he had deceived, and was taken directly from the hospital into custody. While Ryan was receiving treatment at the hospital, Dr. Daniel approached me with news that he hoped would be encouraging. He told me they had obtained more evidence, including the events at the hospital. Dr. Daniel had explained that the case was being processed quickly. His tone was a mix of professionalism and support that I desperately needed. I could only nod, still struggling to digest the recent events, grateful for such competent and trustworthy people by my side. I told him that without his and Karen's help, I wouldn't have known what to do. This situation had shown me truths I hadn't been able to see for years. 2 weeks flew by, and finally, the day of Ryan's trial arrived. The courtroom was thick with tension and anticipation. Ryan sat next to his court-appointed lawyer, looking deflated and still showing signs of his recent medical condition. He couldn't afford a specialized attorney. I sat on the opposite side, flanked by Karen and Dr. Daniel, waiting for the proceedings to begin. As the judge entered, a hush fell over the room. She declared the beginning of the fraud case against Ryan Anderson, including charges of forging medical documents and defrauding me, his wife. Her powerful voice echoed through the courtroom. Dr. Daniel then began presenting the evidence clearly. He showed photos of Ryan outside the house and hospital medical reports detailing his drug overdose and its consequences. He stated that these documents proved not only that Ryan had faked his condition but had also taken extreme measures to maintain the lie. As he spoke, he directed a stern gaze at Ryan. Karen also testified, recounting what she had seen and how Ryan had threatened her when she began to suspect the truth. Her voice trembled but was filled with determination as she explained she had only wanted to help a friend. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath. I told the court that I had believed in Ryan and loved him, but it had all been a lie. My words were heavy with pain and betrayal. I explained that he hadn't just lied about his health, but had manipulated everyone around him with that lie. Ryan had his chance to defend himself, but his words sounded hollow and desperate. He tried to explain that he had been afraid of losing everything and didn't want to be a burden, but ended up becoming one anyway. I sat in the cafe with Karen, sipping coffee and reflecting on the events that had changed our lives. The world continued to turn outside, but in our little space, we contemplated the power of truth and resilience. I commented on how strange it was to think about everything that had happened, how life could change so dramatically. I fiddled with my coffee cup unconsciously as I spoke. Karen nodded, looking at me with understanding. She said that in the midst of this chaos, she had discovered the power of true friendship, which was invaluable to her. She smiled, conveying support and affection. As we talked, Dr. Daniel joined us briefly. He provided updates on the legal wrap-up of the case, ensuring that Ryan was being properly cared for and held accountable for his actions. Before leaving, he told us it was good to see us supporting each other and to rely on him if we needed anything. As the day wound down and the sun began to set, I looked out the cafe window, contemplating the future. I mused that despite everything that had happened, we were on a better path now. I reflected that even after the darkest night, there was always light. A soft smile played on my lips. Karen nodded and reached across the table to take my hand. She agreed, saying that as long as we had each other, we could face anything life threw at us. As we finished our coffee, we were ready to face whatever came next, confident that truth and friendship would be our foundation, keeping us strong no matter what challenges lay ahead. I thought about Ryan, now truly unable to walk due to the side effects of the drugs he had taken uncontrollably, serving his sentence in the state prison. I imagined him sitting in his wheelchair, staring at the gray courtyard, regretting the choices that had led him to this harsh reality. I could almost hear him muttering to himself, wondering what might have been if he had chosen a different path. His voice, even in my imagination, was tinged with regret. Yet, I knew his mobility was slowly returning, and he would eventually walk again. But the fear of his condition, even temporary, and the years he had to spend in prison had taught him a valuable lesson about being honest and truthful to everyone around him. As I sat there with Karen, I felt a mix of emotions: sadness for the years lost, anger at the deception, but also a strange sense of peace. I had faced one of the toughest challenges of my life, but I had come out stronger. I thought about all the nights I'd spent worrying about Ryan, all the career opportunities I'd passed up to be his caregiver. It was like I had been living in a fog for years, and now the sun had finally broken through. I knew the road ahead would still be difficult, but I was ready to face it. After all, I had faced countless challenges in my nursing career. This had been the toughest one yet, but I had seen it through. As Karen and I left the cafe, I took a deep breath of the evening air. This was the start of a new chapter in my life. And no matter what happened next, I knew one thing for certain: I would never let anyone deceive me like that again. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape, and I was ready for whatever came next.
Thank you for joining us for this compelling story. We encourage you to like and subscribe to our channel, as your support motivates us to continue sharing stories day after day. And don't miss the video that's about to appear on your screen. We'll see you in the next video.